It is Thursday, July 8th here at Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the podcast for the second day in a row. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Small. This is episode 4 of our divisional preview series. We hit the NFC South yesterday, which was Wednesday. Now that I'm back from family vacation, we got to double these things up to get back on track. You can find the AFC and NFC West previews wherever you get your podcasts, of course, among many other things that are on DraftSharks.com right now, Jared.
Yeah, I posted my stacks article today. 7 stacks, a bunch, that I've been targeting. So check that one out.
Yeah, and interesting because stacks have been getting talked about on Twitter lately too. People wondering if it's still worthwhile with such a focus at this point on stacking. I don't know. Do you have any changing opinions on that as you think about it?
I mean, you just can't reach to create stacks. I mean, and people have looked at the actual numbers too. If you're reaching, more than a round past ADP, any benefit you're getting from that stack is just, is just negated by the value that you're losing, by making that reach.
Right. I think that's the important takeaway here is don't reach just to make sure you get those stacks, but it's still going to help you, especially in best ball, if you do pair like your quarterback with wide receiver 1 and stuff like that.
Yeah. And it's fun to stack like the Cowboys, but I think it's the cheap stacks that can really make a difference. And I have a few in my article that are like, you can just get them in the double digit rounds. And if those hit, that's kind of when you're in business.
Yeah, make sure you check those out. Today, we are going to stick with the South. We're going to head back to the AFC, where the biggest question mark in the entire division hangs like a dark cloud over this first team that we're going to get to. But we're going to steer away from that for the moment because every single team also has coaching changes, including the Houston Texans, which is the first one up. David Culley is the new head coach taking over this mess, and I do not envy his first head coaching job in the NFL. He actually spent 2 years as an offensive coordinator in the past, but it was all the way back at UTEP in 1989 and 1990. That would be University of Texas, El Paso, a little bit ways away from the NFL. He spent the past 27 years as an NFL assistant, primarily coaching wide receivers. 19 of those years Culley spent with Andy Reid, 15 in Philly, 4 in Kansas City, most recently worked with the Ravens. The lack of coordinator experience in the NFL certainly doesn't mean that he can't be a good head coach. It does mean that we don't have a whole lot of history on his offensive preferences, though, so we'll have to see that. Tim Kelly, on the other hand, returns as the offensive coordinator in Houston. He spent the past 2 years in that gig. How much of that was him? How much of that was Bill O'Brien is tough to know. Bill O'Brien spent most of that time calling the plays, though.
Yeah, it's kind of rare to see a new head coach come in and retain the old offensive coordinator. I'm not sure how much input Kelly had over the past 2 years. I'm not sure how much input Culley's going to have on Kelly's offense now. So lots of questions here. As you alluded to, though, the biggest question is who's going to be playing quarterback for the Texans.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a minute. Tim Kelly did finish last season calling the plays at least, and back before Desean Watson split with Houston and maybe, the NFL in general, he said that he felt comfortable with Tim Kelly running the offense. So I guess we should expect something similar. Houston was actually 13th in overall offensive DVOA last year, so really probably not as bad as you might think that they were. League worst in rushing DVOA, but 8th in passing. Of course, the big question is Desean Watson. Run-pass split, it was the league's 4th most pass-heavy offense last year. Before that, though, 6 straight years at 58% or more. 58% pass or lower. Deshaun Watson up in the air, I think that's going to affect whether they're leaning run or pass. If he's back, I would expect them to be 60+% pass. Otherwise, I think they're probably going to try to go less than that as much as they can because I don't think this is going to be a good team.
Yeah, so Houston, as you mentioned, pass-heavy offense last season. They were second in situation-neutral pass rate. Now, again, that was with Deshaun Watson. That was with Will Fuller, who's now gone. Kind of made sense to go in that direction. I think, as you said, they're going to try to run it more this season, especially if there's no Deshaun Watson. I'm just not sure how much they're going to be able to because, this projects, I think, along with Detroit as, the worst teams in the NFL. So I still actually have Houston going 61% pass, not by design, but just because I think they're going to be trailing so much.
Yeah, I think anything in there is fair because there's so much we don't know about this team yet. Tim Kelly did say in June, quote, "I've got to do a good job calling more runs." So he's definitely going to try to do it more. But as he said, they were among the most pass heavy in the league last year. So there's really almost nowhere to go but down from there. Let's go to the QB notes. And as we mentioned, the big question is, will Deshaun Watson play? And the answer right now is we don't know. There's no criminal charges facing him. So I guess that's a mark in favor of the possibility of him playing. But 22 civil lawsuits against him that allege sexual assault and or misconduct. I mean, even if those sit unresolved and go no further in the legal process by the start of the NFL season, the personal conduct policy in the NFL certainly leaves the door wide open for the league to keep Deshaun Watson off the field if it chooses to while those things are pending.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect to see Watson on the field for week 1, at minimum. I think he's looking at, some type of suspension. And then of course, beyond all that stuff is the fact that, he had requested a trade from Houston back in January. He has had issues with Houston's owner, with Houston's GM. So even if he's cleared to play this season, it might not be with Houston. So I think at this point you should be, projecting the Texans, looking at the Texans as if Deshaun Watson won't be there.
Yeah, that's what I would do as well. And ADP in best ball drafts right now says that people aren't expecting Deshaun Watson to play at all. I think that certainly makes sense if you're drafting a team where you don't want to take a 0. That said, I mean, if you can stash Deshaun Watson late in the draft as a third quarterback, there's really only upside from there.
Yeah, I mean, I found him tough to pass on like these underdog drafts, just because if you're trying to win $1 million,
right.
Like if you can get Deshaun Watson in the 17th round, even if he plays 10 games, regardless of who it's for, he's going to return a big profit.
Yes, I agree with that. Back in Houston, if there is no Watson, I think Tyrod Taylor presents some sneaky late upside. I'm not saying I'm excited about him. I'm not saying he's going to do anything special. He stunk at Cincinnati in his lone start last year with the Chargers before the doctor decided to puncture his lung and give us all Justin Herbert as a present. 2 full outings for the 2018 Browns before Baker Mayfield took over. Tyrod finished QB6 against Pittsburgh in week 1 that season, then QB 24 at New Orleans. Then he got yanked in his third start against the Jets. He spent 2015 to 17 as the starter for the Bills for most of those games, finished 12th, 14th, and 24th in fantasy points per game in those 3 seasons, top 3 at the position in rushing yards each of those 3 years.
Yeah, that rushing ability is, what could make him fantasy relevant. And I think you'd be talking like 2 quarterback super flex leagues. I don't even think he'd be a spot starter in 1 quarterback league, just because the weapons here are so weak. The offensive line is a concern. I also think too, assuming there's no Deshaun Watson, that we're going to see rookie Davis Mills at some point. It would just make sense for Houston to get him on the field and see what he can do. So Tyrod would probably start, early on, but I wouldn't expect him to last the whole season.
It would make sense for them to try Davis Mills at some point if he's ready. He had 11 starts across 3 college seasons, so entirely possible Davis Mills is not ready, even if they want him to be.
Yep.
On to running back notes. This team, as I mentioned, was league worst in rushing DVOA in 2020, but don't fear. They brought in Mark Ingram to fix that, and Phillip Lindsay and Rex Burkhead. What do you got on running backs in Houston?
I mean, it's just an absolute mess. I don't know how the workloads – I don't know how the carries are going to be split. I think – the one relatively safe bet here is that David Johnson's going to continue to handle the majority of the pass catching stuff. He's just easily the best and most proven pass catcher among these guys. I mean, Mark Ingram had some decent pass catching seasons with the Saints, but nothing special. Phillip Lindsay has been well below average in that department. Rex Burkhead is solid, but I don't know what he has left with at his age and all the injuries he suffered. So I do think Johnson could rack up a decent amount of targets. I'm still like forcing myself to just avoid this backfield in fantasy drafts though.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Ingram, I was shocked at how quickly Houston jumped on Mark Ingram. He was a healthy scratch in 4 of Baltimore's last 5 games last year, including the playoffs. So and Mark Ingram's done. Phillip Lindsay has had some good times, but he was also 3rd worst among 47 qualifying backs last year in Football Outsiders rushing metrics, well behind Melvin Gordon performance-wise, and clearly Denver was like, we don't need this guy anymore. Rex Burkhead has been a fantasy thorn ever since he landed in New England, at least. He never gets enough touches to be startable, comfortably, but he always takes enough receiving and enough goal line work just to be a pain and just to make you think, well, maybe I should toss Rex Burkhead into this lineup for a bye week or something. So it's really just a mess overall. I think David Johnson is still a top bet for touches overall, primarily for the reason that you mentioned. He's the best bet for receptions, but it's definitely not an attractive backfield by any means.
Yeah, and I would bet against both Ingram and Burkhead being on this final roster. I'm not sure exactly what the salary cap ramifications are, but I think one of those guys will be cut, which will clear it up a bit. I do think there's a chance Lindsay leads in carries. As you said, he wasn't good last year, but he dealt with a bunch of injuries. He had a toe injury, a hip injury, a knee injury, and a concussion. And he was good on the ground in his first 2 seasons in Denver. Houston obviously went out, signed him to a decent sized contract. He's making a little over $3 million this season. But again, I think there's a chance that Lindsay beats out David Johnson in carries, but I feel pretty confident that DJ will be the lead pass catching back here.
Yeah, Lindsey has not been good in the passing game, especially in pass protection so far in his career. Pass catcher notes, it's really also impossible to get excited about anything here. Brandon Cooks, though, I mean, he has to outperform his wide receiver 42 ADP, doesn't he?
He does, just because he's still good, and he really should see massive volume. I mean, without Will Fuller, and we saw Cooks without Fuller over the final 4 games of last season. He averaged 10.3 targets, 7.3 catches, 108 receiving yards per game over those 4. Saw a 27% target share in those 4 games. I think that's kind of about what you project him for this season. So, we have him for a bunch of targets. Obviously, with no Desean Watson, the efficiency is going to come way down. But, we know volume trumps all in fantasy football. So, yeah, I think Cooks is definitely undervalued in drafts right now.
And we know that Tyrod Taylor does like to throw the ball deep, but even if he's not terrific at it, that boosts, I think, the upside a bit on Brandon Cooks, at least for maybe a longer ADOT. I shouldn't say it boosts his upside versus who else would be a quarterback. But, again, wide receiver 42 ADP is the key here. Cooks finished 17th in total PPR points at the position last year, 18th among wideouts in targets, despite missing 1 game, despite Will Fuller being there for 11 games. So there should be volume, and volume is over everything here. He probably should get to 140 targets for this team.
Yeah, again, it's going to be a bad team that's going to be playing catch up a whole bunch.
Elsewhere, Houston drafted Nico Collins in round 3. They added Chris Connolly, Andre Roberts, Chris Moore, Alex Erickson, Taywan Taylor, Dante Moncrief in free agency. Basically, if you were a crappy wide receiver with no contract this offseason, they were your charity.
Yeah, this roster is just a joke. I think it's going to be Nico Collins and Chris Connolly battling for that, outside spot that Will Fuller vacates. I think, Houston probably wants it to be wants it to be Collins. They took him in the 3rd round, actually traded 3 picks to move up and draft Nico Collins. There's been some buzz on him early. So he's a guy I've even been at least eyeing, late in these best ball drafts, because I think, he could finish second on this team in targets.
Yeah, worth noting, too, that Chris Connolly has some history with David Culley. They were both with the Chiefs back before Culley moved to Baltimore and Connolly signed with the Jaguars. So, take that for what it's worth. The other holdovers with Brandon Cooks are Randall Cobb, Kiki Cutie. I mean, if it's Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, I'm really not interested in anyone here beyond Brandon Cooks.
Nope, me either.
Darren Fells is gone at tight end. So Jordan Akins basically should be the lead tight end here. He's also going pretty much undrafted by ADP so far, despite topping the depth chart. There's upside as a tight end 3, but there are also plenty of those types of players. And, who knows for sure if Jordan Akins is the lead target at tight end for them this season.
Right. They have Kahale Warring back. They added Ryan Izzo from New England. They drafted Brevin Jordan. So, it's not Akins' job for sure. He's going to have to beat out those guys in camp. Darren Fells only leaves behind 28 targets. Fuller leaves behind 75. So there's room for more opportunity here. But, I just think Akins is a special player. And again, it's going to be a bad offense. So, yeah, maybe as a tight end 3 if you're, going that deep in like FFPC, but definitely not excited about Jordan Akins or anyone in this tight end group.
Right. So who do I like? There's no true like in Houston. You can't look at this team and like anything. Brandon Cooks, David Johnson, Phillip Lindsay, I think are values at their draft prices. It's been a while since the last time I drafted David Johnson, though. Maybe looking a little bit too much at, the report here and there that Phillip Lindsay could lead this team in carries. Lindsay's probably my highest owned Texan at the moment. I've been taking him in RB5 range, but that should probably shift to being more Brandon Cooks than Phillip Lindsay, I think.
Yeah, Cooks is the only guy I like here. Again, going outside the top 40 wide receivers, you're just betting on volume and talent with him. Even though, it might be ugly, the efficiency, again, is definitely going to suffer if Watson isn't there. I have been taking late shots on Desean Watson and Nico Collins, but, just super late guys. David Johnson's the guy who's always, sitting atop the MVP board for, 3 rounds. The board's telling me to take him. I have a few times, but I'm definitely trying to limit my exposure. Because, again, I do think there's a chance Lindsay takes over as the lead ball carrier.
Yeah, I've definitely gotten some David Johnson, especially before Phillip Lindsay signed with the team. The who I don't side, it's Houston, everybody. I mean, this is not a team I want to overcommit to anyone unless we do finally find out that Desean Watson is coming back.
Yeah, I mean, I even like more Lions than I do Texans. So this is the offense I think I want to invest the least in.
Yeah, that's a good way to leave the Houston Texans behind. So let's move on to the Indianapolis Colts. Tell me about the relevant coaching changes here.
Yeah, new offensive coordinator here with Nick Sirianni taking the Eagles head coaching job. It's going to be Marcus Brady replacing him. Brady's been the Colts quarterback coach for the last 3 years under head coach Frank Reich. He does have 6 seasons of offensive coordinating experience in the CFL, but none in the NFL. Again, though, Frank Reich is back for his 4th season with the Colts. He has confirmed that he's going to continue calling plays. So despite the OC change, I don't expect to see much change in offensive scheme here.
Yeah, that's what I would assume too. We've got an offensive coach running the team. He's been calling the plays. Should be more of the same. The run pass split was interesting to look at getting ready for this. The 3 years of Frank Reich in Indianapolis, they went 62% pass with Andrew Luck the first season. Then, of course, he retired. They went 53.6% pass with Jacoby Brissett as the quarterback. And then last year, 55.5% with Phillip Rivers. What do you have in this category?
So I have them at 56%, just a slight bump from what they did with Rivers last year, because I expect this to be a good team, and I think it's a team that wants to continue leaning on the run game with that offensive line and with Jonathan Taylor. And there's a chance, though, that they jump up back up to 60-ish%, kind of like they were with Andrew Luck, if Carson Wentz bounces back and is the guy he was, from 2017 to 2019 under Frank Reich.
Yeah, I'm with you. I had 57-43. That's what the average is if you look at the first 3 years of Frank Reich calling the plays in Indy. So I think that's a fair spot. It's basically the same split that you have. QB notes, you already started talking about him, Carson Wentz. They traded a 3rd-round pick in this past draft for him, plus a conditional 2nd-rounder in 2022. That one would become a 1st-round pick if Wentz plays at least 75% of the snaps for the Colts this season, or 70% of the snaps, and they make the playoffs. So it seems like they're making a decent-sized bet that Carson Wentz can rebound this season.
Yeah, and if you look at his career, last year was obviously ugly, but that's kind of the outlier. He was a much better quarterback for his first 4 seasons, the first 2 of those coming under Frank Reich in Philly. Wentz didn't really hit the fantasy radar as a rookie. He finished 24th among quarterbacks in fantasy points. But the following 3 years, 2017, 18, and 19, he was a quarterback 1. He was 3rd among quarterbacks in fantasy points per game in 2017. He was 12th in 2018 and quarterback 8 in 2019. So there's, he's not even 30 years old yet. So there's bounce back potential here again in an offense that he's familiar with.
Yeah, and clearly the Colts believe that is the case. There's decent talent. I don't want to oversell the pass-catching talent in Indy, but there's decent talent on board and with some upside among the young guys. And most importantly, Carson Wentz is QB 19 in ADP, so you're not making an overly risky bet that he rebounds. It's really just kind of in a range where if you're volume drafting, you're probably taking a bunch of different guys, but it's certainly possible that Carson Wentz stands out by season's end as a value in that range.
Yeah, the other big thing working in his favor is just the O-line he's going to be playing behind here, because the Eagles O-line struggled mightily last year, and Wentz struggled under pressure. He was 32nd among 35 qualifying quarterbacks in PFF passing grade when under pressure last year. Nabi is going to be playing behind this Colts O-line. They returned 4 or 5 starters from last year, and last year they ranked 7th in both PFF pass blocking grade and Football Outsiders adjusted sack rate. So Wentz's job should be easier this season. I think the downside is, again, that we expect this to be a run-leaning offense, which is going to hurt Wentz's volume. But again, if they do, bump up to 59, 60% pass, that's when I think, you could see Wentz finish as a top 12 quarterback.
Yeah, I hope, even as an Eagles fan, I hope he rebounds in Indianapolis. Last year was tough to watch, but I don't blame Carson Wentz totally for it. Running back notes, Jonathan Taylor was the 3rd best back in fantasy football from week 11 on last season, trailed only Derrick Henry and David Montgomery in fantasy points over that span. There was definitely some luck involved. 8 touchdowns over his final 5 games. 5 of the final 6 defenses he faced ranked 18th or worse in Football Outsiders run DVOA. The Colts were also winning over that span, so that helped boost his carry total for the season. The issues, I think, Taylor ranked 29th among running backs and targets. And through those first 10 games, he really wasn't very good. It wasn't like he was plugging along doing all right and then jumped up over the final 6.
Yeah, and that latter point isn't so much of a concern for me, because I thought this guy was an elite prospect coming out, and for whatever reason he got off to a slow start, but he looked like Jonathan Taylor to me over the second half. So I expect him to have a big season on the ground again. Running behind one of the better offensive lines in the league. The issue is definitely his passing game role. Even in that hot stretch to close the season, he averaged only 2.7 targets per game over that stretch. That's a full season pace of 43 targets, would have ranked 27th among running backs. Now, Taylor was actually pretty good in the passing game last year. He was 9th in yards per route run, 11th in PFF receiving grade among 37 qualifying running backs. But the problem is Nyheim Hines is back, and Hines beat Taylor in both of those metrics. I believe he was actually number 1 among running backs in PFF receiving grade. So I just don't see a reason for the Colts to go away from Hines as, the primary pass catching back. So, target volume is the concern for Taylor, especially considering he's going, in the middle of the first round of fantasy drafts.
Yeah, Nyheim Hines matched or exceeded Jonathan Taylor in targets in 13 of their 16 shared games last year, including the playoffs. Overall, 13.8% target share for Hines, 7.1% for Taylor, so nearly doubled him in that category. Hines only reached 10 carries once in games he shared with Taylor, so obviously that's the limitation on him, but I agree. He's going to continue limiting that target upside, and that's what really bothers me with Jonathan Taylor, where he's going. Cam Akers looks like a better bet for overall touches than Taylor. I think Joe Mixon looks like a better bet for touches. So, when you have those two in mind, it's tough for me to get excited about Jonathan Taylor where you have to pay for him in round 1. I think one other positive working in his favor, the Colts carry Vegas's 8th highest projected win total. Now, that doesn't mean that they're a top 8 team heading into the league, and it certainly could be a team that Vegas is wrong on, especially if Carson Wentz does not rebound this year. But that's a positive for the carry outlook. I'll consider Jonathan Taylor near the end of round 1, but honestly, if it gets to that point and he's still on the board, I'm probably taking a wide receiver over him.
Yeah, I haven't drafted JT once yet, and I'm not sure I will. Zeke, I'm taking over him easily. I'm taking Austin Eckler over Jonathan Taylor in full PPR. JT for me is in the same tier as the guys like Cam Akers, Joe Mixon. You mentioned Nick Chubb. I think he is very similar as far as talent and role goes. So yeah, he's just going too early for me. Again, unless you think they're just going to phase out Hines, that's kind of where Taylor would pay off that price tag. I don't expect that to happen though.
Yeah, I don't see any reason to expect them to do so. Hines, on the other hand, not even the other hand, it might be the same hand, because Hines I don't think is all that attractive as a fantasy option either. We know the receiving involvement is there. Obviously, if Taylor were to go down, Hines would pick up some carries. But, last year he had a top 24 PPR score in half of his games, which is a decent number for the kind of back he is. But 25 running backs beat that rate. 4 others tied it. So it's nothing special, even in terms of a week-to-week upside kind of thing. Nyheim Hines just doesn't excite me where I draft him.
No, he's not a guy I would draft in lineup setting leagues. I think he's okay as like an RB4 in full PPR best ball, because he'll give you some games. It's always hard to know when they're going to come, but he'll have some 4 or 5 catch games this season. One other note I had on these Colts running backs and their pass catching projections is Phillip Rivers really, for most of his career, has targeted running backs at an above average rate, whereas Carson Wentz has tended to be below average. Now, I think a lot of that is just which running backs you have at your disposal. Phillip Rivers played with Austin Eckler. He played with Darren Sproles. He's had good pass catching backs. I'm not sure the target share of running backs is going to drop off a ton, but I think it might drop off some just, because the change at quarterback.
Yeah, and if you look at the two different styles, Phillip Rivers is much more likely to check down and try to get the ball to somebody who can actually escape, whereas Carson Wentz clearly believes in his ability to scramble away from trouble and likes to take shots downfield and get those, high leverage passing plays. So, it's one of those things you don't want to overrate, but also don't ignore it. It's definitely a move down in terms of receiving outlook for running backs to go from Phillip Rivers to Carson Wentz.
Yeah, we should also just mention Marlon Mack here, who is back coming off the torn Achilles. That's a tough injury to return from. I'm not interested in drafting him in fantasy, but there's a chance he cuts into Jonathan Taylor's workload at least a bit, and is just kind of annoying.
Yeah, if there was nothing else that I disliked about Jonathan Taylor, I would not skip him just because Marlon Mack is back. But since that's the case, it is like, Marlon Mack's probably going to get some carries.
Yep.
Pass catcher notes. This is an interesting group, and it's more interesting because all of their price tags are suppressed. Michael Pittman leads Colts wideouts in ADP, and he's only a wide receiver 48. So you're not betting too heavily by taking shots on any of these guys. No Colts receiver cracked the top 50 in PPR points per game last season. However, Pittman reached 5 catches just 3 times. So you would have liked to see more out of him in his rookie season, but he also missed a large chunk of games right in the middle of it and actually starting early in the season. So kind of impressive that he was at all productive as a rookie, given that.
Yeah, he had that compartment syndrome in his calf in September. That's an injury like I remember Hakeem Nicks had it, and he was kind of never the same player after having that injury. I think even Tyler Lockett had it a couple years ago, didn't he? But yeah, Pittman needed surgery for that. He missed 3 games and then just, sort of didn't do a whole lot until the playoffs. I mean, he had that game against the Bills, that playoff loss to the Bills, 10 targets, 5 catches, 90 yards. That's kind of how he headed into the offseason. So maybe some momentum there. He's a guy the Colts took early in the second round 2 years ago. Actually took Michael Pittman ahead of Jonathan Taylor. And, there were some videos. The front office and coaching staff was obviously pumped when they landed Pittman. So, I think there's definitely a path there for him to emerge as Indy's number 1 wide receiver this season.
I agree with that. We weren't in love with him as a prospect coming in. We'll see how much that carries over into year 2. It's also worth noting he didn't fare particularly well in the advanced metrics. T.Y. Hilton outperformed him by those measures, looking at PFF, looking at Football Outsiders type stuff. And then the Colts re-signed T.Y. Hilton this offseason for $8 million on a 1-year contract. He did flirt with other teams, most notably the Ravens, it seemed like. Again, he outperformed Pittman in those categories, also including passer rating on balls thrown his way. He's going about 3 rounds behind Pittman. So, I mean, if we're talking Michael Pittman versus T.Y. Hilton, it's tough for me to say that Pittman's a better pick than T.Y. Hilton right now.
Yeah, that's fair because of the ADP discrepancy. The contract you mentioned for Hilton surprised me. Fully guaranteed $8 million this season. It actually makes him the 14th highest paid wide receiver in 2021. Hilton was pretty much like off the fantasy radar for most of last season, and then he got hot down the stretch. Averaged 72.5 yards on 4.5 catches over his final 6 games. He, like Jonathan Taylor, benefited from an easy schedule down the stretch. 5 of those final 6 games came against bottom 12 wide receiver defenses. Hilton's had his injury issues. He turns 32 in this coming November. So I have some concerns there, but again, he's so cheap in fantasy drafts. So I think he's definitely a guy worth taking some shots on.
And I think the concern, even if you're not worried that he's specifically going to miss games, injury issues for an older guy who has been a speed receiver, I think, is worth being concerned about. Even if T.Y. Hilton holds up for the season, he's probably lost a step from the earlier career version of himself. Doesn't mean he's going to crash, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on, especially in season, as we're deciding whether to trade guys and what else we need on our roster. Paris Campbell is the next guy worth talking about here. He's going another 2.5 rounds behind T.Y. Hilton. So again, going at a range where you don't really have to say, I'm in on Paris Campbell this year. You can just be like, I'll see what happens. GM Chris Ballard over the winter said, quote, I still believe in Paris Campbell. The Athletic Zach Kiefer says, quote, Frank Reich has big plans for him. I'm not specifically high on Paris Campbell just because I'm not sure I see the path to enough targets to make him a consistent fantasy threat, but round 16 ADP leaves basically no risk regardless of format.
Yeah, decent flyer at that price. We haven't seen much of Paris Campbell because of injuries over the past 2 years. He's played in only 9 games over the last 2 years. He's flashed in that limited action. He has 3 games of 5+ catches among those 9. He has 6 carries in those 9 games. So, it seems like the Colts have wanted to get the ball in his hands. He was a 2nd-round pick. He ran the 4.3 40, 99th percentile spark guy. So some intrigue here. Again, he's just like completely unproven. We haven't seen any of them.
Yeah, he's like a tiny version of Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, faster even.
There you go. Whatever a fragile, faster Deebo Samuel is, that's Paris Campbell here. I don't know whether to be excited about that or to not talk about it at all. Right. Tight end is a bit crowded as well. The whole group is worth noting because last year, collectively, Colts tight ends ranked 11th in PPR points, 9th in non-PPR. No individual Colts tight end, though, ranked higher than 26th in points per game. Trey Burton led that group. He's dangling on the open market right now, no contract from anybody. So it leaves behind the question of who is the top guy in his absence. I mean, this still remains an obvious candidate should Zach Ertz's asking price become lower from the Eagles, or whether the Eagles finally just decide to cut him loose and let him be a free agent.
Yeah, it's definitely a situation to pay attention to. Frank Reich's offenses have always targeted tight ends at an above average rate. That's remained the case with the Colts. Colts tight ends have accounted for 26, and then 22% of the team's targets in Reich's 3 seasons. The league-wide average is a 20% target share for tight ends. And Trey Burton, as you mentioned, he leaves behind 47 targets. So there's opportunity here. I'd love to see Mo Alley Cox get a chance to be the guy. He was one of the more efficient tight ends in the NFL on limited action. Saw just 39 targets last year, but he ranked 2nd in yards per target among 44 qualifying tight ends. He was 4th in yards per route run. The Colts too gave him a 2nd-round restricted free agent tender. So, they made a pretty aggressive move to make sure that they didn't lose Mo Alley-Cox. But, they still returned Jack Doyle. They drafted Kylan Granson in the 4th round. So I'm just not sure they're going to give Mo Alley-Cox the opportunity to be that guy. If they do, though, I think, he's definitely someone that could hit the fantasy radar.
Yeah, this isn't a situation to make big bets on, but it's a situation that could pay off by making small bets, I think. Kylan Granson generated some immediate buzz after arriving as a 4th-round pick. Sometimes those guys, though, disappear once we get to the rookie season. I mean, especially at tight end, we've seen it takes a while to get it down. So they can be excited about Kylan Granson and still have him do absolutely nothing for 2021. Jack Doyle sank all the way to 8th on the team in targets last year. I think he only missed 2 games. So it's not like injury knocked him out of the way. He was 3rd among Colts tight ends in targets with Trey Burton and Mo Alley-Cox there. I agree that Mo Alley-Cox is the one to bet on here. I think he's an easy bet as a tight end 3 at best ball time, but I also think he's the kind of guy worth stashing on a lineup setting roster because there's a chance that, even if they don't go all in on one tight end as the lead guy and go with 2 guys, we've seen Indy work out before where there's tight end value for 2 players or, at least one that can start more often than not for us among those guys. And Mo Alley-Cox is the upside athlete. He's that prototype that all the teams started looking for after Antonio Gates hit, where he used to play college basketball, then switched over to football, really hasn't been focused on football for all that long still. So from the point where you're taking him, there's really nothing but upside, and there definitely is upside to Mo Alley-Cox.
Yeah, Alley-Cox is a freaking monster. I think he's like 6'8", but he looks like he's like 7'2" when he's on the football field. So he's been like one of my favorite super late round tight end dart throws. I would definitely take Mo Alley-Cox over Jordan Akins late.
Mm-hmm.
Kylan Granson is definitely a guy I'd look to stash in Dynasty. He was actually a wide receiver at Rice before transferring to SMU and then playing tight end for 2 seasons there. So he's definitely that catch first tight end. So stash in Dynasty, but I don't expect him to make a big impact this season.
And everybody's a wide receiver at Rice. I don't think Big 12 believes in actual tight ends.
Nice.
Who I like? Who are you liking the most besides Mo Alley-Cox here? Anybody?
So it's the 3 receivers at cost. Michael Pittman, wide receiver 48, I believe you said. I have T.Y. Hilton, wide receiver 60. Paris Campbell, wide receiver 64. It's a messy situation. We don't know exactly how it's going to work out, but I think at least one of those guys, and probably 2 of them, are going to outperform that ADP.
Yeah, the passing game here too. I realized in prepping for this show that I probably haven't gotten enough Colts passing game pieces in my best ball draft so far. So I'm going to go ahead and try to add more of those. The who I don't side, I'm not going to crush you if you're drafting Jonathan Taylor in round 1, but he's not for me there not because I don't think that he's an upside player. I absolutely do. And you mentioned before, we talked about him a lot as a prospect heading into last season, but at the range where you have to buy him now, I just think that the downside risk outweighs the possibility that he really booms this season. I don't think that either he or the Colts are going to be good enough where Jonathan Taylor has like a 15 touchdown season this year, or even, catches 45 balls and just kind of hits the ceiling in all the areas where he needs to boom from a late 1st round spot.
Yep, love the player, just can't take him over. Guys like Zeke, who we know is going to play a big role in the running and passing game. Again, even someone like Austin Eckler, who I think is a good bet for 80-plus targets. I think JT is just more likely to disappoint, especially even on a weekly basis. When game flow's working against him, he's just more likely to disappoint than someone like Zeke or Eckler, or even Joe Mixon, who's going to do more in the passing game this year.
Yeah, and even Cam Akers, who if I am looking at them as players, I like Jonathan Taylor better as a player, but Cam Akers is I think the better bet to reach any of those ceiling points to get he's at least as good a bet for carries. I think he's a better bet for hitting a touchdown ceiling in the Rams offense this year, and I think he's a better bet for really booming his receiving usage this season.
Yeah, and not to get too far into Akers, I mean, he's still unproven in the passing game, but he definitely has a clearer path to become the Rams' clear lead pass catching back than Jonathan Taylor does.
Jacksonville Jaguars, another team that replaced its head coach. Urban Meyer takes over after 17 years as a head coach at the college level, out of football the past 2 years, 2019, 2020. I know he cited heart issues in stepping away. Not sure going to the NFL is the best remedy for that, but we'll see how it works out for him. His college teams averaged 42% pass, 58% run. That's obviously not a split that you're going to replicate in the NFL, but, at least speaks to him liking to run the ball. The offensive coordinator is Daryl Bevel, who we have seen in the NFL for a lot of years, 14 previous seasons as an NFL coordinator, most recently for the Lions the past 2 years. Overall, Bevel has leaned run, 54-46 average pass run split over his entire time as an OC. The past 4 offenses, though, have all been over 59% pass.
Yeah, to me, just looking at these guys, I think Meyer and Bevel both tend to just lean towards the run. And, they obviously return James Robinson. They draft Travis Etienne. They sign Carlos Hyde. So it seems like they want to be a run leaning offense. You have a rookie quarterback, even though it's a guy that, we think's awesome and is NFL ready. They might want to protect Trevor Lawrence a bit. So I do think they're going to try to, be a run leaning offense. I also don't know how good Jacksonville is going to be. So I don't think they're going to be, super run heavy.
Yes, I agree with both of those things. I think they would like to run more to help that rookie quarterback, and they added the running backs that you mentioned. I also don't think they're going to be very good overall. So I landed in the range of 57-58% pass for projecting this team.
Yeah, I got him at 58%.
QB notes, Trevor Lawrence is that guy that they drafted first overall, near universally heralded as one of the safest QB prospects ever. So tough to argue against that when all the draft nicks seem to think so. Tremendous 3 seasons at Clemson, played 40 games there, so you love the experience that he comes with. Good accuracy, strong arm, willingness to throw the ball deep, and a deft runner. I mean, not the biggest running quarterback even in this class of rookies, but active and willing, especially near the goal line. I would not be surprised to see Trevor Lawrence put up like 5+ rushing touchdowns a season.
Yep, definitely going to add value with his legs. Seems NFL ready as a passer, was especially good throwing deep at Clemson, which you like the fit with DJ Chark and Marvin Jones, 2 guys who can win downfield. You have Laviska Shenault, who's more of the short range run after the catch guy. They add Travis Etienne, who should be really good in the passing game. So the weapons are there for Trevor Lawrence. That the rushing ability is there for Trevor Lawrence. He has a chance to score as a quarterback 1 this season.
Yeah, of course, he's not going to sneak up on anybody because he's been a star since he was in high school. He's QB 14 in ADP right now, so it's not a screaming value, but I do think he still provides some upside from that spot. I would take Trevor Lawrence straight up over Joe Burrow among the guys currently going ahead of him.
It's not crazy. I think if Burrow's healthy, I'd rather have him. He has the knee concern, obviously. The reason I like Lawrence, especially in these best ball drafts, is because those 3 wide receivers I mentioned are, I think, relatively strong value. So you just have good stacking options with Lawrence. And again, you don't need to reach on any of those guys, Chark, Shenault, or Marvin Jones, because they're fine values. And if you miss out on Chark, target Laviska Shenault. Miss out on Shenault, target Marvin Jones. So I like stacking the Jags passing game.
And even if you don't get any of those Jaguars receivers, you still get a quarterback who has the legs, who has the arm, who has those receivers that you like. So you can get scores from him even if you don't stack him with the receivers. Let's go ahead and jump to the pass catchers since you mentioned those guys. I wonder if DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault, Marvin Jones are headed for kind of a Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown type of split in targets here. I'm definitely not comparing the level of talent on these guys versus those guys in Tampa Bay, where at least 2 of them are way more proven and Chris Godwin's getting pretty close to it. But it's the kind of group where I can't safely say exactly how the target pecking order is going to shake out.
Yeah, that's fair. I'd say 2 things. The nice thing, unlike the Tampa guys, at least like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, you don't need to spend 4th or 5th round picks on these Jags receivers. You can get them in the 8th, 9th, 10th round for Shenault and DJ Chark, and Marvin Jones is available in like round 12 or whatever. The other thing that's nice here is Jacksonville has nothing at tight end. Tebow is not going to be a thing if you're wondering. So you could see these 3 Jags receivers combined for like 60% of Jacksonville's targets.
I thought he was going to be left-handed Taysom Hill this year.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
We'll see. Back to the wide receivers. I think obviously the biggest mark in their favor is that QB got a whole lot better when they drafted Trevor Lawrence. It was a mess last year, specifically looking at Chark and Shenault, who were mired in the mess that was there. Gardner Minshew, Mike Glennon, Jake Luton all started games for that team. I would still like to see Gardner Minshew get another shot somewhere else, but that's kind of beside the point for this discussion. New coaching staff plus the arrival of Marvin Jones kind of hits a reset on roles for everybody. It's been Shenault drawing the early buzz, though. And interesting to look at his fit versus the other 2. Last year, 6.2 yard average depth of target versus 14 for DJ Chark. So drastically different roles between those 2. And I think even springing forward to this year, Shenault looks like he fits nicely in the type of role that Curtis Samuel played for the Panthers last year between DJ Chark, Marvin Jones, who are, pretty strictly outside wideouts.
And I'm not even sure what Jacksonville's new coaching staff thought of Laviska Shenault because Urban Meyer came out and said that he was hoping to get Kadarius Toney in the first round of the draft, who, to me would have looked like a Laviska Shenault replacement. So, but then as you said, Shenault was one of the buzziest players in the entire NFL this spring. So I think he obviously impressed the coaching staff, maybe changed their minds. So I'm excited about Shenault. He's a guy I liked coming out of Colorado. The concern was durability, and that still is my concern with him. But he actually led Jacksonville's wide receivers in yards per route run last season. Beat DJ Chark as a rookie. Shenault was. So he is kind of my favorite among these three at ADP. But again, I like them all at cost.
And I mentioned Curtis Samuel, but maybe Jarvis Landry is the outlook that we want here, because I think Laviska Shenault is the best bet to be efficient in terms of catch rate and yards per route run in this offense. So it's a question of how many targets he gets. But as you mentioned with the prices, not going too high to just make a bet and then see what happens on him. We'll see exactly how things shake out here. And let's circle back to the running backs now, because Travis Etienne factors into this picture as well. After not getting Kadarius Toney, they did draft Travis Etienne. They've talked about him as a slash type player. He has already spent some time working with the receivers. We'll see exactly what his role looks like. But there's certainly room for Travis Etienne to fit, even if James Robinson remains a thing for the Jaguars.
Yeah, there's been a lot, said by Urban Meyer and, written about Etienne, practicing at wide receiver. Meyer, though, basically said that, they know Etienne is a great runner. They just wanted to, get him work as a pass catcher in the spring. So I don't think he's going to be a slot receiver. I think he's going to be, Alvin Kamara all along has been sort of my comp for Etienne's usage. You're not saying he's as good a player. He might be. But just as far as usage, 10, 12 carries per game, 4 or 5 targets per game. I think that's the role Etienne should have, and hopefully that's the role that the Jags are planning for him.
Yeah, Travis Etienne wasn't even a high volume receiver until his final 2 seasons at Clemson, and most of all his final season there. And even then, it's not like he was running downfield routes. I mean, he was less of a downfield receiver than Najee Harris was for Alabama, looking at their 2 seasons. So it's a situation to be aware of with the working with receivers and what Urban Meyer said about him right after the draft, but it's definitely not something to overrate and think that they're looking at Travis Etienne as Percy Harvin, as has been tossed around. So the question obviously becomes Travis Etienne, James Robinson, who leads this team in carries? It seems like the Jaguars are planning for Robinson to be the leader there. He was good last year, not stellar if you look beyond the counting stats and into the efficiency and advanced metrics.
Yeah, exactly. He was fine, kind of proved he can handle a big workload, which is nice. We don't know what this new Jags coaching staff really thinks about James Robinson. Again, the fact that they spent a first-round pick on Etienne and also signed Carlos Hyde, who, Meyer has experience with from their time at Ohio State. That makes me wonder a bit, what their plans are, what they think about James Robinson. But really, Robinson you can get in the 8th or 9th round. Even Etienne slips into the 5th round at times right now. And this situation's murky, but sometimes murky situations mean, we can, get value there. So I think both guys are fine at ADP right now.
Yes, I agree on both guys being fine, even as we look forward to lineup setting. However, I do think that we shouldn't sleep on the arrival of Carlos Hyde. The Jaguars gave him just a little bit less than the Falcons gave Mike Davis in free agency. Hyde said that he knew as soon as Urban Meyer landed in Jacksonville that was the only place he wanted to go play. Clearly still feels a connection to his college coach. Was solid in Seattle last season, so it's not like we're talking about a totally past his prime, useless running back. This isn't Mark Ingram. I think Carlos Hyde is going to play a role here. That certainly makes me less interested in James Robinson anywhere really within the single-digit rounds. I think at this point, Robinson basically looks like Ronald Jones, but in a worse offense and with less physical ability.
Yeah, I guess I'm not as worried about Hyde as you are. I think he's just kind of there as depth and as kind of veteran presence in a young running back room. We'll see though. Again, I'm a bit worried about this coaching staff in general. Just the kind of the moves they've made so far. All the stuff with Etienne, adding Carlos Hyde, adding Tim Tebow. I'm not sure this Urban Meyer, Daryl Bevel led offense is one I want to, be too heavily invested in.
Yes, I definitely do not want to invest too heavily in here. But who do you like among Jaguars?
Yeah, again, mostly the wide receivers. So, ADP, I have DJ Chark at wide receiver 32, Laviska Shenault wide receiver 36. Marvin Jones at wide receiver 56 might actually be the best value among those guys. We didn't talk much about him, but he's remained effective, the past couple of years in Detroit, and he played under Daryl Bevel in Detroit. So he has, more experience in this offense than DJ Chark or Laviska Shenault.
Yes, I especially would like Marvin Jones in a best ball format because I think he's going to be the most volatile. I expect him to be third in targets among these guys if they're all healthy. That could not be the case, but he has never been a target hog at any point for any team, even with Daryl Bevel there. So Marvin Jones, I would be less interested in once I'm setting these lineups, but I agree that they're all solid values where they're going. I'd say my favorite among them at the moment is Laviska Shenault, especially once we turn to lineups that we're going to have to set week to week going forward. Because even if we get, 5 catches for 50 to 60 yards a week from Shenault as an average, as kind of the floor for him, that's a fine starting point for me in a PPR league.
Yeah, that's fair. And then on the dislike side for me, I don't think anyone is like egregiously mispriced. I think, Trevor Lawrence and the running backs are just sort of fairly priced. I haven't drafted a ton of them, more Etienne than James Robinson, but even Robinson, someone I think I want to start getting some more pieces of. We've had some discussions on him in the new Discord, and I'm sort of warming up to the idea that, maybe he gets 200 carries this season and, as an 8th, 9th round pick, he could pay off.
I think I'll let somebody else do that in the range where I can take players such as Zach Moss, maybe Damian Harris, although I'm not excited about him either. So just not a whole lot that stands out to me with Robinson. I think it would need a Travis Etienne or Carlos Hyde injury to really give him a whole lot of upside. Basically, the running backs, I'm not taking them unless they really fall beyond ADP at this point. The one I would be most interested in is Etienne because I think he's the one that has that true ceiling potential.
Yeah, when Etienne gets to the 5th round, I start to get interested because he's a first-round running back. We think he could play a big role in the passing game. He definitely has a path to return like 2nd or 3rd round value this season.
And even if they start the season with this plan to make James Robinson the lead ball carrier and Travis Etienne the jacked up Nyheim Hines, it could be by week 6 they're like, listen, we got to give the ball to Travis Etienne more because this is ridiculous.
Yes, agreed.
Tennessee Titans. Tell me about relevant coaching changes on this front.
Yeah, change at offensive coordinator in Tennessee. And we talked about it yesterday in the NFC South pod. Arthur Smith becoming Falcons head coach. He was the Titans offensive coordinator the past 2 seasons. And Tennessee, it was one of the most efficient offenses in the NFL under Arthur Smith. They finished 6th and 4th in offensive DVOA those 2 seasons. They were 4th in yards per play last year. So the loss of Smith is definitely a concern here. He's going to be replaced by Todd Downing, who, worked under Smith the past 2 seasons as Tennessee's tight end coach. He does have 1 season of NFL experience, came with the Raiders back in 2017. That offense was not great. They finished 17th in total yards, 23rd in points scored. They were a run-leaning offense. They ranked 22nd in situation-neutral pass rate that season. They were also slow. They finished 30th in situation-neutral pace. So I definitely have concerns here going from Arthur Smith to Todd Downing.
The last OC in Tennessee before Arthur Smith was Matt LaFleur, went on to the Green Bay head job. Arthur Smith moved up from tight ends coach to OC, then the Falcons job. Todd Downing last year was the tight ends coach for Tennessee. So, if you're looking to vault your NFL coaching career, try to become the tight ends coach in Tennessee. It's the path to success. Todd Downing, makes that same jump. I don't think we can expect the offense to stay at the same level, but they also have plenty of pieces for us to not worry too much about it. I'm at a Will C level, but they've still got Derrick Henry. They've still got Ryan Tannehill. They've still got A.J. Brown, and now they added Julio Jones. So I'm certainly not going to expect a big fall off here. I would hope, looking at kind of the run pass split, I would hope that trading for Julio Jones means that you're planning to pass the ball more, but they were 50-50 last year run pass, 3rd most run heavy in the league, and that's at a level that's going to lead the league in run heaviness most seasons. So there's almost nowhere to go but up from there. So even if they are leaning more pass, it's still not going to be a pass-friendly offense, I wouldn't expect.
Right. As you mentioned, 49.5% pass last year. They were 53.1% pass in 2019. I actually projected them at 53.5% pass this season. Again, just because you add Julio Jones to the mix.
Yeah, I've got 56-44. I think that, again, if you trade for Julio Jones and you have A.J. Brown, I just think it behooves you to not run the ball quite so much. But we have already seen Todd Downing say, obviously, Derrick Henry is at the center of what we do. So, right. We'll see. Anywhere in that range, I think, makes plenty of sense.
Yeah, man, I think that the point is that they're very likely to throw up more this year than they did last year.
Yes, and also very likely to throw it less than most other teams in the league. QB notes, whoever does throw the ball, it's going to be Ryan Tannehill. What do you think about Tannehill heading into this season?
Yeah, I was completely off Tannehill before the Julio Jones trade because, again, you lose Arthur Smith, you lose Corey Davis, you lose Jonnu Smith. It was really just A.J. Brown at that point. Adding Julio Jones, obviously huge. So, Tannehill back in like borderline quarterback one range for me. That concern I have is on the, TD regression front. He had a 6.9% passing touchdown rate last year, which is, well above average. The average over the past 3 seasons is 4.7%. So, some chance for passing touchdown regression. Rushing touchdown regression definitely coming. Tannehill scored on 7 of his 43 carries last year, a 16% rushing touchdown rate. Just compare that to his first 7 seasons in the NFL. He scored on 3.4% of his carries. I think you expect him to score 2 or 3 times on the ground this season, not 7, which is a pretty big deal.
Yes, only Lamar Jackson over the past 2 seasons has had a higher passing touchdown rate. 5th most rushing touchdowns among all quarterbacks in that time for Ryan Tannehill, and that's even with only starting 10 games in 2019. Led all quarterbacks in yards per pass attempt over the past 2 years as well, though. So he has been overly efficient in his 2 years as the Titans quarterback. I would assume that his efficiency is going to remain high because he's got A.J. Brown and Julio Jones as his 2 receivers. And there aren't many offenses in the league that are going to match or even come close to that level of talent, but there is certainly room for him to come down some. That all said, QB 11 ADP right now, I think it's a fair price for Ryan Tannehill. We've seen over the past 2 years that he does have upside beyond that level.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I prefer like Tom Brady and Matt Stafford straight up, and they're kind of going in the same area. So I honestly haven't drafted a ton of Tannehill.
I think Matthew Stafford versus Ryan Tannehill is pretty even, and Tannehill is the better runner between them.
For sure.
We'll see if there's a big gap in passing volume between them. However, that could certainly be another differentiator. But, in a range where I think he's fairly priced. So let's skip to the pass catchers because we're talking about that passing game, because we know the running game more at this point. Is Julio Jones about to be the number 2 wide receiver on his team for the first time since 2012? It sure looks like it.
Yeah, I think he is. I'm not sure the target discrepancy, when Julio's healthy will be big. I do expect Brown to lead the way. This is another case where, these 2 guys should combine for like half of Tennessee's targets when they're on the field. Julio Jones did turn 32 in February. He's obviously had the long list of injuries, but he remained one of the best receivers in the NFL when he was healthy last season. 3rd in yards per target, 4th in yards per route run among 87 qualifying wide receivers. Is now joining this Titans passing game that, as we've said, has been super efficient. The concern is just, Atlanta was so pass leaning. So they ranked 8th in pass rate and 4th in pass attempts last season. Tennessee ranked 30th in both of those categories. We do expect Tennessee to throw it more, but they're not going to throw it as much as Atlanta has. So, when Jones was traded from Atlanta to Tennessee, his target projection took a pretty decent sized hit.
Yeah, he's going in round 4 right now. Could he deliver from there? Sure. A.J. Brown, though, has performed like an alpha the past 2 years. I was excited about him for fantasy outlook before Julio arrived. I still want to like him, but there has not been a whole lot of lowering on A.J. Brown's price since then. He remains inside the top 8 in ADP at the position, still going around the 2-3 turn. So, like with Tannehill, I think A.J. Brown will remain an above-average producer on the efficiency front, but betting on a player to do that early in your draft has been a good way to get yourself into trouble in building a fantasy roster.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's why I was off A.J. Brown last year. I think, you were as well at cost, and that obviously turned out to be wrong. Like at some point, if a guy starts to be that efficient year over year, you just have to start to expect it. And, with Brown, it's still only been 2 seasons. You don't expect him to be as efficient this season, but I still think he's going to see more targets this year than he did last year. Again, the Titans lost a combined 192 targets with Corey Davis, Adam Humphries, and Jonnu Smith leaving. Julio's obviously not going to soak up all of those, so I think there's room for Brown's target share to still climb. Plus, again, we expect Tennessee to throw it a bit more, so I think he'll set a new career high in targets. My concern with A.J. Brown is the knee surgeries he had in January, and he still was sidelined in spring practices. So we'll have to see if he's ready to go for the start of training camp.
I wish he were consistently going in round 3. Then I would take some A.J. Brown as it is. I think I'm kind of resting on my early shares on him. if all things go right, this could certainly be a DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett kind of duo, even if the team is not among the league leaders in passing volume, which we certainly don't expect. But, I don't have any idea what the target volume picture actually looks like under the new OC with these two wideouts. I guess between them, I'm a little bit more worried about passing on Julio Jones at his price than A.J. Brown at his price right now. But I'm clearly not worried enough that I'm actually targeting either of them at the moment.
Yeah, and Brown gets into the third in plenty of drafts, and I do like him, in the early to mid third round.
I'm not finding myself interested in any other Tennessee pass catchers. There was some fantasy buzz on Anthony Ferkser early in the offseason. There's been no Titans buzz on him that I've seen so far.
No, I mean, I do think he's going to be their lead pass catching tight end. He's actually been efficient when he's gotten opportunities behind Jonnu Smith. And Ferkser had two big games last year when Smith was out or left early. Smith was out in week 13. Ferkser went 5 catches for 51 yards on 7 targets. So I guess a big game was overstating that one. But then he did have a big game in week 6 when Smith left that one early. Ferkser had 8 catches for 113 yards and a score. Again, Jonnu Smith leaves behind 65 targets. Julio probably picks up some of those, but there's room for Ferkser to get into that 60, 70 target range, and that's enough where he might struggle for reliable weekly value in lineup setting leagues, but I do think he's a decent lower end tight end 2 target in best balls.
Yeah, and he was climbing earlier in draft season where you could find him in the mid-teens, but right now he's tight end 24. Fine from there. I certainly see the upside from there. My concern is that they were already playing it as a committee at tight end even when Jonnu Smith was there, and I think he's a much bigger talent than Anthony Ferkser, so I don't see any reason to believe that Anthony Ferkser is going to take over as a clear lead tight end here. And if I don't get a limited guy like Anthony Ferkser as the clear lead tight end when I'm setting my lineups, I'm just not that interested.
Who else do they have there? I'm trying to look it up right now. I think they have Jeff Swaim.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, they have Jeff Swaim, Tommy Hudson, Jared Pinkney. I mean, there's a chance that they just kind of can't go committee and Ferkser sees the majority of the tight end targets.
I mean, there's a chance, but last year we were like, they got Jonnu Smith and then what? Anthony Ferkser, Jeff Swaim. I mean, they've got to throw the ball to Jonnu Smith.
Yep, that's fair.
Back to running back notes. Derrick Henry is Derrick Henry. There's a new offensive coordinator. He says it's no secret that getting Derrick Henry the ball is a key to this offense. Derrick Henry has led the league in carries, rushing yards, and rushing touchdowns 2 straight seasons. I would say he certainly remains the best bet to lead all 3 of those categories. The problem there, though, and it's a problem only when you're deciding whether to draft him where you need to do so. Even if he delivers in all of those categories once again, if he relying on rushing touchdowns as much as he does increases the week-to-week volatility in season. So you could look at his numbers at the end of the year, and Derrick Henry could have delivered once again. But within the season, he might have lost you a couple of matchups versus the other top running backs. So
yeah,
looking at last year, for example, Dalvin Cook posted top 24 scores in all 14 of his games. James Robinson, Alvin Kamara did so in 13 games apiece. They missed 3 combined games. Aaron Jones did so in 12 of 14 games. Derrick Henry did so in 12 of 16 games. So, I mean, not bad, but that's a rate of 75%. That's a rate just below what Myles Gaskin did, for example. So, again, Derrick Henry is among the top running backs no matter what measure you want to go by. But when you're weighing him versus Dalvin Cook, Zeke Elliott, Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley in the middle of round 1, I think there's more week-to-week volatility with Derrick Henry.
Yeah, and those are all PPR numbers you were referring to, right? Which is obviously where Henry gets hurt because he's not. It's past time just to be banking on him getting a big role in the passing game. He actually did set career highs last year in targets and catches, but he still ranked 38th among running backs in targets. He was 45th among running backs in catches. So especially with Julio Jones there now, that's just not going to change. But Henry, as you said, remains probably the best bet to lead the NFL in rushing yards, in rushing touchdowns. He's had a boatload of carries, but he's just been remarkably durable. He's only missed 1 game over the past couple seasons now. His O-line might be better too this year. They get Taylor Lewan back, who went down with a torn ACL last October. They added a tackle in the 2nd round of the draft. So again, Henry should dominate on the ground. It's just the lack of pass catching kind of keeps him out of that top tier PPR and non-PPR. I think he's at least the 3rd guy off the board behind McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook.
Yes, I'd see him in that range in non-PPR. And hey, if you're playing in a format where you need big December, Derrick Henry in December is a better bet than Santa Claus in December.
Sure is.
There's been some slight buzz lately on Darrynton Evans. He worked with receivers, Travis Etienne style, and OTAs. I just think that the upside on Darrynton Evans is low volume Nyheim Hines, and that doesn't strike me at all as interesting.
Yeah, I mean, his best case is playing like the role Dion Lewis played in 2019, and Lewis wasn't really a fantasy factor that season, even as Tennessee's lead pass catching back. And then even as I don't think Evans is a Derrick Henry handcuff. Brian Hill might be the better Derrick Henry handcuff. He's just that big back who is more similar. Neither guy is anywhere close to Derrick Henry, but Hill is at least more similar in size and playing style. So I think if Henry misses time, it'll be a committee with Hill and Darrynton Evans.
Yeah, maybe Evans leads the team in carries if Derrick Henry were to go down, but I agree. I think that he would be sharing that job, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if it's Brian Hill or somebody else that's not even on the roster yet who would actually lead that backfield in carries were Derrick Henry to go down. So I just don't see the path to Darrynton Evans being all that helpful fantasy asset.
Agreed.
Who do you like among tight ends at cost right now?
I hate to say it, but I don't have any like hot takes on the Titans. I think a lot of guys are just like properly valued. We talked about Tannehill at quarterback 11. The AJ Brown and Julio Jones are kind of fairly valued. Derrick Henry is going about ratio. I mean, Henry is a guy I still just don't end up with much of in these full PPR drafts I'm doing. But again, I can't really argue against him. I do think he's one of the safer picks at running back.
We're going to end this in lockstep because I haven't found myself drafting that many Titans so far, and not because I hate them, but because the good options are just at least appropriately priced. So I'm not finding them dropping to a level where they look like values, and then I have to reach a little bit if I want to make sure to get them. I think I probably like Ryan Tannehill best at cost, among the top 4 on this team. But again, not somebody that I think is a screaming value at QB 11 overall. And Derrick Henry, I'm going to make sure that I don't head into the season with no Derrick Henry in these best ball lineups. But at the range where he's going, I'm much more often taking the other players that I'm comparing him with. Dalvin Cook is my lock pick at number 2 behind Christian McCaffrey. And then Ezekiel Elliott has just been climbing up and up and up through draft season. I think he's probably 3rd on my board right now.
Yeah, again, just to bring it back to the top of the Titans section with the coaching change, I'm just a bit worried what this offense is going to look like without Arthur Smith. We'll see. That's just kind of in the back of my head whenever I'm considering drafting Titans.
Mm-hmm. That's going to do it for this AFC South preview edition of the podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now. You can see the projections for every player that we discussed on here, plus every other fantasy relevant player on offense and on defense. We've also got new articles hitting the site basically every day at this point. That'll keep going throughout the season. You can join the free Draft Sharks Discord channel on mobile or desktop. Lots of buzz there already. I've had to try to ignore the notifications constantly on my phone during this show. So jump in there, talk to us about whatever you want. Pick the brains of some high-stakes players that have already joined us in that discussion. And coming soon, I mean, we've got a supercharged DraftSharks.com coming up. So you're going to want to keep an eye on everything going on at DS. As always, you can find us on Twitter. We are at DraftSharks. Jared is at SmolaDS. I am at SchaufDS. That's SCHAUF. For Jared Smol and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.